I hope everyone has had a wonderful July 4th holiday. You can tell now that we taped this ahead of time, since for the rest of you, it will have been a while ago. Today is going to be all about studying outside of your country. Our second segment will be about advice for American students who want to study outside of the US. And my colleague Zaragoza Guerra will be joining me for this. He works with a lot of American students who apply everywhere. And the last segment will be about paying for college as an American attending college out of the country and international students attending college here in the US. And that'll be with one of my finance colleagues, Robin Stewart. But first, we're talking with Lauren Randall. And any of you who might be watching the video of this, you can see her on the screen. She's a colleague of mine and a former college counselor for the Canadian International School of Hong Kong. And she has advice for international students who want to attend college in the US. So welcome, Lauren.
Hi, Sally. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Thanks so much for coming on. I mean, I remember when we hired you, we tried to hire you before, but then when we got you later, I was so excited about your international experience because I think it's so valuable. So,
Yeah,
um,
I will just say, kind of almost to toot my horn a little bit, but it made me such a better educator. I had the US perspective, but living in Hong Kong, and these students were from all over that lived in Hong Kong, but then were applying to colleges all over. So it really pushed me to learn about other systems and think about the international student experience within the US in particular. So it was a
mhm.
great experience and professionally really rewarding.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, just being a college counselor at a domestic high school helped me. So for you, that's like to the nth degree, even better. So let's start with kind of the practical for students who are applying, this fall. What are some of the things that they really need to be thinking about? I mean, we're in July. The application system starts here much earlier than it does at most other countries, is my understanding. So yeah, like what are some things that they really need to be thinking about?
Sure. Well, in some ways, it's really no different. If I were speaking, it's July. If I were speaking to a student attending a US high school or students abroad, of what they should be doing right now, and that is really defining, refining, their whittling down their college list. But it's particularly tough for international students to engage in that type of research. I think it's hard enough here of connecting with colleges, going to visit, but it's certainly harder when you're on the other side of the world. I think the one thing that has really changed in the last couple of years is a benefit for all is that when I lived in Hong Kong, virtual information sessions and tours were really not that common. But now that is the norm. Pretty much everybody offers it. So really, using this time to research your colleges, making sure that you have connected with them by registering for an information session and tour, by reaching out if there's optional interviews, or if there's an alumni network within your home city, connecting with those schools, again, demonstrated interest, connecting, learning more. That's really the same advice that I would give for a US student at a US high school or international student. But I think it's particularly important to for students to do that now this summer, because if they sometimes they are traveling, maybe they are taking holiday vacation, that they can get on college campuses. So that's front and center is narrowing down that list. And I'd love to talk a little bit as well about the list, because in my experience with international students, I think it's sometimes really different than what I see from US students. We can get to
Mhm.
that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So what are some of the specific ways they should connect with colleges, though? Like, I think, there are the virtual information sessions, et
Yeah.
cetera, but what should they do beyond that?
I think one really important resource that students should be looking into is that many colleges will have an international student services center or office or department. That is a key term here to be searching within the each individual college's website, to connect with them. That is what they're there for, is to answer your questions. They oftentimes have student ambassadors often by country or by region, that you can ask targeted questions to, why did you pick this college? What is the experience like as an international student? How are you supported? Is there a separate international student orientation? All of those questions that you can be targeted directly to this office. If the school does not have an international student services office, I might take note of it,
Mhm.
because that might indicate how much that university or college is the type of resources they are dedicating or not to their international student population. If that professional office is not available, then I would go to clubs and organizations within the college. Oftentimes, there are international student clubs or organizations, um, often by region, or country or territory. So these are great ambassadors, even though they're not officially working for the university, to ask their experience. What was your transition like? How do you get to and from the airport?
Mhm.
On your own. What does my packing list need to look like? What just any sort of specific questions asking current students is going to really be invaluable, for particularly for international students.
Mhm. And I think that's important to emphasize when I talk to families. I don't work with a lot of families from overseas, but a good number of the families that have come recently to the US, they don't really see the point in all this research. They're like, well, my son should adapt. This is the best school. We want to go to the best schools. So I'm just kind of curious if you could kind of talk from your own experience about why some of this the issue of fit is going to be important also to an international student, and frankly, maybe even more so.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that sometimes in the initial stages, it can be
Mhm,
hard. I've had some difficulty um, employing that concept of fit
mhm,
outside of just pure academics. And what
mhm,
is the best college for being a biology major? What's the best college for being an engineering major? And it can be harder to get to that next level of, saying, well, your student is going to live at this place for the next 4 years.
mhm,
There's a very big difference between studying in Albany versus Albuquerque, right? And
mhm,
so, and I understand, like, that can be really overwhelming if you're not overly familiar with the geography of the United States. But really thinking about how, I mean, truly, it comes down that impacts whether or not you buy winter jackets or not. Your packing list and living there. Is going to be really different based on the geography of where you're living, and that's just one element, is geography. But
mhm,
really think, I think transportation is huge. If you are not directly in a city, how do you get? And I know, public transportation in other countries is often a lot better than it is in the US
mhm,
outside of cities. So how do you get to that campus if you fly into the airport? Or what is the closest airport? What is the travel? Where do you connect to get home? The US, we have several breaks. Are you going to be able to make it back to your home country during the American Thanksgiving break? It's not particularly long, but what will that feel like if you are the only, or not the only student, but one of few students on campus as everybody's leaving? So asking again, thinking through that, of what that's going to feel like, look like for your particular experience, is really important research, and or at least food for thought to think as you're finalizing your list.
mhm. I mean, I think the cultural fit too, right? Like, I mean, if it's important to you to attend a mosque or a Hindu temple or something like that, and there is none around, that is probably going to be challenging, that sort of thing too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's kind of back out from this. I mean, I think we've addressed kind of some of the biggest challenges of studying in the U.S. from abroad that people may not have thought about. So I'm just wondering if there are any more that you can think of.
Well, challenges from studying coming in from abroad, I think in terms of the application itself, I think some students, or just maybe the process in itself, I think it's really confusing for a lot of students. In other countries, it's very straightforward. You
Mhm,
have to know what you want to study. There's not really this undecided time that you get in the United States. in many colleges where you have 2 full years to figure out what you want to study before declaring that. That's not all cases, but it can be.
Hmm.
And that's just a really different concept for compared to other countries. So that time and space of thinking about exploration and what are core requirements. Did you know that in certain schools you're going to have to take a philosophy course? Does that
Hmm.
interest you or not? So really helping students understand that first 2 years can be confusing or just different in terms of educational philosophy within the US. In terms of the application process, again, in other places, it is so straightforward. You tell me your grades, you tell me your national exam score and what you want to study, and I'll tell you if you're in or you're out.
Hmm.
And so helping families understand the nuance behind holistic review. I think it's confusing for US families, but it's
Hmm.
really confusing for international families where they say, well, I meet the metrics, I meet the published test score, I meet the published. What more do you need? And in some places, it's just not that common to engage in lots of extracurricular activities or things beyond academics. So
Hmm.
that can be another difficult concept to understand of what US universities are looking for in terms of holistic admission.
Hmm. What about, like, what would you say then are the biggest rewards?
Well, I think a lot of the rewards here are maybe like we don't have a crystal ball, right? For any student going through college. I think in my experience, some of the unexpected rewards for international students in particular is that the pathway is not always straight and narrow. You don't necessarily start in as an engineering major and end that way. And that's a beautiful blessing that you can have that time to figure it out at a university in the US. And you can double major or explore new interests. And that's not always the case in a lot of other places. If you change your mind, well, you're out of luck or you start over.
Hmm.
So I think it offers students, I think a big reward is that flexibility that international students maybe aren't necessarily used to or accustomed to, but it can be really rewarding. Think big picture of how you want to develop as a human being,
Hmm.
and explore, interests and talents that maybe you didn't even realize that you had.
Hmm. I also think that the sort of social life that surrounds American universities can be very, very rich. I think, I mean, obviously, a lot, there's some of the overseas universities have a lot going on as well, but I think, really it's so accessible to everyone in the US, and I think that's great.
Absolutely. And to that point, just going back to really looking through what the organizations and clubs are at particular colleges. So if you're not the type that normally gets involved outside of school, I mean, we got to be clear here. You spend more time outside of the class than you do inside the class. So
Hmm.
how are you going to engage in that college campus? What do you need to feel comfortable? Is it people from your home country? Is it people with similar interests? What is it? Is it going to be something totally new? What is it going to be for you to feel happy, safe, comfortable, and engaged for those 4 years when you're outside the classroom as well?
Hmm. What do you think has been most surprising for international students about the US system of higher ed? Is it any of the things we've already discussed, or is there anything else that comes to mind that has really surprised people?
Well, I mean, I think again the being undecided is normal and common and okay. That's a
Mhm.
surprise. Um, holistic mission is a surprise or something to understand.
Mhm.
If I can answer the question from my biggest surprise of working with
Mhm.
international students sometimes is around their college list, where they really say, well, okay, they can study in the US, but only for their reach schools. They kind of have, they use the US as I'm going to apply to every Ivy, and then if not, we're going to attend our home, you know, public option. So that's kind of been a surprise to me of saying, well, do you either want the U.S. education or not, because it can often be a very different experience and philosophy of education again. So that's always been a surprise to me, that I feel like there are a lot of families that think of the US as their reach destination, and their home country as their plan B, which I don't know, good or bad, but that's just been a surprise for me.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I always encourage families to think about what do you want, and then we can find that at a whole variety of levels of selectivity. And that seems to be a challenging concept to kind of wrap your mind around. And then I kind of feel like, well, maybe you don't really want to go overseas if it's not worth it,
It
unless you
could
go to an
be.
Ivy. So something to
Right.
think about. So, all right, any sort of last thing to wrap up with, either advice for seniors, rising seniors right now, or kind of in a broader sense for students who are thinking about studying abroad eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, where I started and where I'm ending is
Mhm,
not really any different for US students versus international students. Of
mhm,
now is the time. Start now. You have more writing than you possibly realize. I think that's the
mhm,
other thing. The concept of writing different essays for different schools, that was also new
mhm.
for my international students. So they did not allow themselves enough time to really do the application as thoroughly as needed. So start now. That would be
Mhm.
my, but I guess that's my advice for anyone.
Yeah,
you
it
know,
is. Yeah, it is. But hopefully the international students will really hear it. So, all right, Lauren. Well, thank you so much.
absolutely, Sally. Is always a great chatting with you.
All right. So we're going to take a break now, but when we return, we'll be speaking with Zaragoza Guerra, a college coach colleague, when we return.